if you want to go ahead and begin.
You guys have questions about the Enviroscape?
Yes. What is it?
Can you watch with plastic in the water, the workshop?
Yeah, we want away from that.
What questions do you have for them?
If it's in the water.
Okay, raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll.
Do they throw the dirt into like the road and stuff? Like they kind of like at the construction site when it goes to the water? I don't know.
I'm sorry, what was this question?
When the stuff goes into the water, when the stuff from the construction site and stuff, when it goes in the road, does it like go through the sewers into the water?
Yeah, typically. So you saw the storm drains, right? When it rains, everything drains into those grates, or it could just be a ditch as well, or just over the land. And yeah, that's how water travels. It's going to go downhill. It's going to find the easiest path with gravity, and yeah, goes right into the waterway. Do you know why soil erosion is bad for the water? Yeah, they would have a hard time breathing in that cloudy water, or it might cover up where they spawn, which is where they lay their eggs, and that's where the baby fish come from. So if that lake or stream fills up with sediment, it's gonna just cover that stuff right up, which is really bad for their habitat. Yeah.
Okay. Who else had a question? I think Evan, you had your hand up. No. I can't hear you, Jalen.
Who's the Patrick Benson in the middle?
No, this is not the dirt doctors. This is the other one. Yeah, go ahead. This is the one that had the model with the little tractors, and there were farms, and she was sprinkling dirt on the fields and on the roads. Like the pollution.
So I have some questions from a different teacher that wasn't able to attend. One of her questions was, why is it important to know that we live in the Raisin watershed?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So we all live in a watershed, and a watershed is simply an area of land that all drains to one particular water body. So if you're in the Raisin watershed, that means all the water from the land in your area is going to drain to that river and eventually out to Lake Erie. And that water eventually is going to flow actually out to the Atlantic Ocean. And we feel like it's important for people to understand that connection between what we do on the land affects our water in a watershed. So yeah, that water is always going to travel downstream somewhere and can have a good or a bad impact on that water. So it's always important to understand and remember. Yeah. You couldn't hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could hear you.
I could do.
Okay.
All right. Well, I guess I'll jump into one of the other questions I had from the other teacher. So she said, students interested in studying the watershed should take what career path in school?
Okay, so I mean, there's different levels depending on maybe what you wanted to do. For myself, I have a Bachelor of Science in Biology. So my position, I'm an environmental planner with the county, and my position requires a 4-year degree, so a Bachelor's of Science. And it could be really any natural science. It could be environmental science or hydrology or biology, like what I have. Really just anything related to the natural environment would be appropriate. Now we have soil erosion inspectors in our office, which is those are the people that on the construction sites, they make sure that they have those soil erosion controls in place. I think they just have to have a high school diploma. And once you get in, say at the county, you do have to get a certificate from the state that you have to renew every 5 years to where you get certified to be a construction stormwater operator is what they're called. So really it just depends on kind of, what field you want to go into. But in our office, we also have a lot of engineers, and a lot of those folks have master's degrees in addition to a bachelor, and they're professional engineers. So there's a whole range.
I think Riley has a question way in the back. No? It's not gonna be that hard.
So I know like in construction site, who puts the fences in so the dirt doesn't fall?
Yeah, typically that is required by the contractor that is doing the work on the site. Typically before they start any of the work, they have to have those fences up, because as soon as you start clearing away the trees and the grass and the vegetation, and you have that bare soil, as soon as it rains, there's nothing to hold that soil in place. So it's gonna wash away pretty quickly. So yeah, it's real important to have that fencing up. And like I said, the contractor, the folks that are out there doing the work on the land, they're responsible to get those in. And technically they shouldn't start any work until someone's come out, an inspector, to make sure that all those, what we call erosion controls, are in place. Good question.
Okay, I'll ask the next one then. What is the one most important thing we should be teaching our students regarding the watershed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to just knowing that we all have individual responsibility to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Because really, the issue with stormwater pollution comes from just all over, from lots of people, lots of different things. So just being aware that what we do can have an impact, and making sure that we make the best choices is really the best way to prevent pollution in the first place. That's really key. So knowing that those storm drains or the ditches are gonna pick up that water that could have pollution, and that it does not get treated. Just knowing that, once we kind of understand how something works, I think we tend to care more about, how to take care of that. So learning at a young age that connection between what we do and having it do a bad or a good thing is really, really important. Just like taking care of your body, knowing what food is good for you and that it's good to drink clean water. It's the same thing with our environment, making sure we take care of the environment so we're safe, and the animals and the plants, they're safe too.
Evan has a question.
Why do people think they can pollute like the water? Why?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people just don't realize that what they're doing could be bad. So that's why, our job is so important, is to help people understand, if I put fertilizer down in my yard and it gets on the sidewalk or the driveway and I don't sweep that back onto the grass, if that fertilizer gets in the water, it's basically like too many vitamins going in the water, right? So the plants are going to grow out of control. And when those plants die off, it could eat up the oxygen that's in the water, so the fish can't breathe. So, one thing leads to another. And, I'd like to think most people don't intentionally pollute. A lot of it is just people don't understand that what one thing can do and lead to another. But sometimes, people do, they may dump something down a storm drain and they think it gets treated somewhere, like it would go to a wastewater treatment plant. And oftentimes that just isn't the case. So again, that's where education is so important, and knowing that runoff does not get treated. It's a really good question.
Is there another alternative to adding fertilizer to your grass or to your property?
You know, there a lot of times you really just don't need fertilizer, right? So most of our soils, when people are putting fertilizers down, there's certain nutrients in those fertilizers that's called like nitrogen or phosphorus. And nitrogen's really good for the roots, and phosphorus helps the grass grow nice and green. And also a lot of times fertilizers might have pesticides and herbicides in them, which kills dandelions and things like that. So we really try to encourage people to kind of embrace nature. Maybe you don't have to have a perfectly green lawn and dandelions, which, by the way, dandelions are really important for our pollinators in the spring. That's kind of one of the first things they feed on in the spring is the dandelions. So having those available for them is really important. But a lot of times, like I said, for our grass in our neighborhoods, we just simply don't need fertilizer. If you do want to do it, we recommend just doing it one time in the fall, because that's when the fertilizer can be absorbed by the roots, and that's what really is going to help the grass to grow nice and strong the next year. So, but again, if you are going to use it, just make sure you're applying it in the right way. You read the label on the bag, and make sure that you're sweeping those particles that might get on the your sidewalk or driveway back onto the lawn, so they don't get washed away. That's the key thing. And I talked about that in the on the model demonstration, if you remember.
Yeah. It, oh, that was good. Yeah, that was good. Oh.
That's me, star of the show.
Are those your kids?
They are, yep. Those are my boys.
Why can't you guys go to like this mechanical system? Like you put the dirty water goes into this machine and it makes the water, all the nasty particles out, and then clean water comes out.
You can do that, actually. Some construction sites, they may add something like that. It's called a mechanical treatment device. And what it does is the water enters, I think it essentially looks like a catch basin, but as the water moves through this thing, it kind of swirls around in there kind of like a tornado. And what it does is it pulls out those bigger particles like trash or litter or sediment, sand, and then those larger particles can be cleaned out because they get kind of put offline into a certain area of that device. But those things are really, really expensive to put in, to purchase, to put in, and then to maintain those. So there really aren't that many out there, to be honest. But it certainly is an option. It's just not feasible to have those everywhere. That's why it's really important for us to prevent pollution in the first place. Yeah.
So, I see someone else has a question.
Micah?
How do they get air in the water?
The oxygen in the water?
H2O. You've heard of H2O, right? The O is for oxygen. There's already oxygen in water.
It's called dissolved oxygen. So the oxygen from the air can, I guess in a way, I don't know how to exactly explain it, but it maybe, like your teacher said, oxygen is part of water, but also oxygen from the air can penetrate the water column as well. And it's called dissolved oxygen once it's in the water. And there's certain levels of dissolved oxygen that we would want to measure in the water that's healthy for the fish. And that would be, it's 5 milligrams per liter, I believe, is what the minimum amount of oxygen you would want in the water. Once you fall below that level, that's when you might have fish dying off because they don't have enough oxygen to breathe through their gills. So 5 and up is what we want to see in the water. And sometimes people will also add, say they have like a pond on their property, they might have what's called an aerator or a bubbler, and that essentially pulls air or oxygen from the air and kind of injects it into the water. You may have seen what looks like a fountain out in a pond, and that can help add more oxygen to the water as well.
Were you in Mr. Craig's class? Have you ever seen his fish tanks?
Yeah.
He has the hose that pumps air into the water. That's kind of what he's doing.
Yeah, perfect example. Yep.
So another question I had from the other teachers were, can algal blooms grow in smaller lakes in places like Lenawee County?
For sure, yeah, algal blooms can pretty much happen anywhere, especially more so in like water that doesn't move a lot. We call it stagnant water. Lakes that are shallow and really warm tend to be affected more by the algal blooms. Lake Erie suffers from that a lot of times. I showed this in my video too, that kind of blue-green pea soup looking water. That's that blue-green algae that Brittany's referring to, that can be really harmful to not only the wildlife, but it can affect pets. You know, if your dog were to drink the water, they could get really sick, or humans too for that matter. And obviously we wouldn't want to be swimming in that water, right? So yeah, and there's really not much you can do about those algal blooms as far as treatment. There are chemicals you can put in to help kind of kill it off, but really most of the time you just have to let nature take its course and let it naturally die off, which typically happens, I would say, within, you know, a few days to a week or so. But again, you know, preventing too much nutrients from getting in the water is really going to help prevent those things from happening in the first place.
That kind of, I guess, leads into partially another question. So she had also asked, how does urbanization affect water movement in the watershed?
Yeah, I talked about this in my video too. So as we get more and more land development with the roads and the driveways and the rooftops, we have more what we call impervious surfaces and less areas of vegetation like trees and grass and flowers and whatnot. So when water falls on the land in a watershed that is more urbanized, which has more cities and streets and buildings, we're going to have more runoff there, as opposed to, say, like an agricultural area that maybe has a lot of farms and fields and trees. We're going to have more water that soaks into the ground. And this is a problem because as we get more runoff, that water can move really quickly through our rivers and streams and can lead to erosion of the stream banks and things like that. And, you know, it's really bad for habitat. It can also destroy property too, because like sometimes people build a house at the top of a river, say, and there's a really steep bank that goes down to the river. And as that stream bank erodes away, sometimes houses, like their foundations, can start to fall in. So it can really be dangerous for infrastructure too. Yeah. So I don't know if it's an appropriate time to mention this, but we really try to encourage people to, say at their home, to install what we call a rain garden. And this is a garden area that might be, say, at the end of your downspout. So you have the along your roof line, you have gutters, and that collects the rain and is going to funnel it down through a pipe that goes, you know, down the side of the house and then out, and that helps get the water away from your house, right? So it doesn't flood into your basement, say. So what we try to encourage is that if we can capture that water on our property, at least 10 feet away from the house, and build a garden with plants that are native to our area, which have been here for a really long time and are really good at soaking up a lot of water, and they're really good for bees and butterflies and things like that, we can help soak that water in rather than having it run off onto the pavement. And schools have done that too. On your, say, on your school property, maybe you could put a rain garden in at the school. Or if you have an area that might pond water, you could consider putting in a garden to help soak up that water. Yeah.
Yeah, that actually kind of somewhat answers one of the questions was what can we do at home to help keep our watershed clean? So if you want to expand on that further.
Absolutely. Yeah. So planting the plants, if you do happen to have a storm drain by your house, maybe right out front, keeping that clean is really helpful. Making sure we don't put, grass clippings or sticks or rocks down there is really important. Obviously, making sure our litter goes in the right place is super important. We talked about the fertilizers, making sure those stay on the grass and don't get on the pavement. And, making sure we pick up after our pets right away. We talked about that, right? A lot of times I've seen it way too many times where I'm at the park or, walking down the sidewalk and no one picked up after their dog. And it's just such a simple thing to do, to take bags with you and make sure you pick up after your pets right away. So those are really the key things. Another one was the grease and oil, right? Making sure that our cars aren't leaking. If we notice that we have a leak, getting that fixed as soon as possible is really important. So it's just real simple little things that, if we all do it, it adds up and we're preventing a lot of pollution from getting in the water.
Yeah. Some other things if you don't mind me chiming in, is talking to your parents about instead of using certain laundry soaps or dish soaps, you reducing the amount of chemicals that you use in your household can also help, because whenever it eventually gets into the local waterways, it's that much fewer amounts of chemicals that they have to worry about, so it's easier and keeps the water cleaner longer.
A couple other things that are kind of big issues for our sewer systems, this is where our wastewater travels, is putting grease and oil from, say, our cooking when we make bacon. Making sure that you don't put that used cooking oil down the drain, because it might seem liquid when it goes down, but when that stuff cools off, it actually turns into a solid. And things can get hung up once it's in the pipe, and it can essentially get clogged, and that could lead to your sewer line getting plugged and having sewage back up in your house, and no one wants that. And then another thing is the flushable wipes. You guys use flushable wipes? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Yeah, like flushable wipes, like baby wipes.
Yeah.
Okay. I used to.
So the important thing with those, even though they might say they're flushable, they really aren't. The problem is they don't break down in the system like toilet paper does. And those wipes get caught in the infrastructure that's in our wastewater systems, and it kind of joins together, and more of them build up, and it creates what we call ragging, or almost like a rope. And it can jam the pumps up that help get the sewage to a wastewater treatment plant. And it's super expensive to pull those pumps out and clean those. So if you do use those wipes, just make sure you're putting them in the trash. That's super important. Never ever flush anything but toilet paper. So, really important thing.
That actually brings a question that I have more for the students that you could maybe tie in, is how many of you know whether or not you have septic systems at home?
I know.
Garbage disposal?
If you live in town, then you're connected to the sewer here. If you live in the country, you have your own separate septic.
I sure will. So.
Have your parents ever had to dig something up and have it pumped out?
Yeah, in camp. My neighbor had.
Okay, in your camper. They probably didn't dig that up though.
Someone's yard they got to, like, across the street.
Yeah, so JC, if you want to kind of talk about septic systems and maybe touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So where I live, I'm in Lapeer County actually, and I'm in the country, and I have a septic system. And you want to make sure that so there's a tank that comes first in the line. So when you flush your toilet, taking showers, all that wastewater goes into a septic tank, they call it. And that's going to have a hatch that you can access from, say, your yard. And every, say, 5 years, it's really important to make sure you have a company come out and pump out that tank. That gets out all the solids that have settled in there. Because once the solids kind of settle out in that tank, the liquid water that travels out to a drain field, which is further down the line, downstream of that tank. And that water is actually, nature cleans that on its own. It doesn't go to a treatment plant, but essentially nature is the treatment plant. So if you don't pump that tank regularly enough, you could start to have solids that go out to that field. And that can start to cause big issues, pollution issues, obviously. And then your system isn't going to function. So you're going to end up, when you try to flush your toilet, it's not going to go anywhere. So again, super important to make sure we're cleaning that out on a regular basis. So hopefully if you do have a system, your parents are kind of keeping track. You know, when's the last time I had that cleaned? If it's been more than 5 years, I should definitely have someone come out. And I believe it costs about maybe $200 to $250 every time you get that pumped out. So, yeah, super important. And I should add, to get your septic system replaced, that could be like $30,000. So making sure you take care of that system is going to save a lot of money. Even though $250 might sound like a lot, it's sure beats $30,000 having to replace the system. So.
All right. Well, it is 10:30. We probably could fit in one more question if anyone had any. No? All right. Well, then I guess why don't you guys thank Miss Jacy for her time, and if you have any other questions, you can always have your teacher email them to me, and I always can send them to her and relay them back when she has an answer. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Hey, thank you.
What a coincidence.
Have a great summer.
Thank you. You too.
I like your watershed map.
Oh, yes, we were talking about that yesterday.
We saw it. Yeah.
Nice.